This is an Amstrad 464 Plus. Amstrad's attempt to make the old CPC range of 8-bit computers sexy and a little bit less broad. I got chatting to a pal of mine, Simon, at Flibblsan, on the Noel's Retro Lab Discord.
This is very good.
Where he was asking for help with an Amstrad 464 Plus. I didn't think it was something I could fix remotely, so I offered to take a look for him. We'll dig into what's wrong with it in a bit. First, I'd like to talk about Amstrad computers and how they affected my life.
Hello.
Which, to be honest, is basically not at all.
Ugh.
The CPC range first appeared in 1984.
The Amstrad 6128. Who says business and pleasure don't mix?
At a time, I was firmly invested in the Sinclair ecosystem. I was more than happy with my little rubber-keyed pal. The thought of paying more than double for an alternative just didn't even register in my adolescent mind, even if it came with a screen. Wind forward to the present day and, being older, hairier, but at the same time balder, and possibly wiser, I have a bit more time to appreciate the alternatives I missed out on back in the day. I've spent the last few years actively trying to broaden my 8 and 16-bit horizons by adding the missing machines to my collection, with some success. And Amstrad were a prime target, certainly the 8-bit machines. I now see they've played a very important part in the evolution of the microcomputer landscape in those early years, and I'm keen to see what I missed out on. And so we arrive at this Amstrad 464 Plus. Now, I should state right from the very start how brave Simon is to offer this up as a subject for a video, considering I wasn't exactly kind and understanding about the individual that repaired the Spectrum from hell. Link in the description. It takes a big chunk of bravery to show others your mistakes. What we'll see inside this computer are the results of someone attempting the work with the wrong tools, the wrong materials, and being at the beginning of their experience journey. By his own admission, Simon used this board as a way to practice. Something I think it's fair to say I think he came to regret. We've all been there, I'm sure, thinking, that soldering looks easy peasy. I can do that. There are some things worth remembering here. The only way you can get experience is by doing, and the only way to do is by having a go. And the only way to have a go is to do. Wait, I'll start again.
Get on with it.
This computer belongs to Simon. It's his property. Before you judge his efforts, just remember that all of us started somewhere. Mean comments will be deleted. The Amstrad 464 Plus has a sister machine, the 6128 Plus. The 6128 has 128K of memory compared to the 464's 64K. It also has a built-in 3-inch disk drive, as opposed to the 464 Plus's tape deck. These days, the 6128's 3-inch disk drive is, how can I put this kindly, about as useful as, well, any floppy disk medium today, only much, much less so. 3-inch discs weren't that popular when they were popular, which makes the 6128, without a handy tape deck and possibly a bit of case modding, a lot less useful than its lesser sibling. The handy thing about the 464 Plus is the motherboard is in fact exactly the same as the 6128, only missing some vital internal components such as the extra 64K of memory and some essential chips for controlling the floppy drive, a floppy disk controller, a data separator, whatever that means, and some logic chips. The locations are all there, just unpopulated. Add these, a few passive components and a Gotek drive, and you have a 6128 unimpeded by its internal drive, with inadequate floppy disks and lack of tape deck. Some might say this is the most desirable combination. Me, for instance, that's the type of thing I'd say. And Simon, who told me about it. So, to the subject of this video. Simon sent this to me after I offered to help him fix a few little mistakes that had cropped up in his effort to upgrade the Amstrad 464 Plus to the 6128 Plus standard. One thing I really like about this version of the 8-bit Amstrad is it not being the same width as a bus. Quite a neat and compact case with a decent feeling keyboard and nice lines too. Nice. Let's have our look around the insides. The Amstrad 464 and 6128 Plus were released in 1990, a staggering 6 years after the CPC range, a mind-boggling 3 years after the Amiga 500 in 87, and a frankly absurd 5 years after the Atari ST first made an appearance in 1985. The Plus range was not a commercial success in the UK, despite the CPC being huge sellers here. I won't even begin to go into the GX4000 console based on the same hardware. 1990! Inside the Plus, we have the venerable and still in production to this day Z80 CPU. 1990! Next to that is a cartridge connector, something that Amstrad added to the Plus range. A notable absence on the board is a ROM chip. The ROM in this case is plugged into the cartridge slot, which we'll see a bit later. On the other side of the slot is the AY38912 sound chip. This large chip here is a custom ASIC, which stands for Application Specific Integrated Circuit, which I assumed was just a glorified logic array, but actually does some neat things like screen scrolling and hardware sprites. This was one of the big differences between this range and the original CPC. And lastly, we have some memory ICs. You know what these do. The motherboard is clean, but I can see a few areas that concern me. These capacitors here have large blobs of solder, and there are signs of work being done to a few areas around the memory chip sockets. On the other side, my concern deepens. These two black wires and this yellow wire here, with the passive in the middle, are perfectly normal, and we can ignore these for now. What really worries me is this area here. These are the 4 memory chips we saw on the other side. Let's stop here and run through exactly what the problem was that caused this damage. That way I won't need to keep going over it. I discussed this at length with Simon, and it turns out he was using a cheap unregulated soldering iron. But on top of that, and to make matters much more tricky, he was using unleaded solder with this bad iron. With older boards like this, which are much less robust than modern types, this is a recipe for disaster. Lead-free solder is not, on its own and in the right conditions, completely terrible. It's not as easy to use as leaded solder, that can't be disputed. It requires a higher temperature to make it flow, and that higher temperature will mean you have less time to work as the flux burns off faster. That extra heat going into these fragile old boards can ruin your day. I like to set the temperature of my iron and desoldering station to around 330 degrees when working on old boards like this. An unregulated iron can be anything from 350 to 400 degrees, possibly more. In that range, you'll find the pads on these 80s machines will be just that much more fragile. As I said before, this was Simon's first attempt at anything like this. One piece of advice I would give to anyone watching this who's thinking, I could do better than that, is to practice on some scrap boards. That was probably the biggest mistake here. But like I said, it was Simon's property and he can do what he wants with it. In the end, he learned a lot, and I got to fix something cool. Anyway, back to the board. This slot under the RAM is a problem. All of that will need to come out. I can see just with the naked eye what looks like broken traces and possible bridges. First thing I can do is test the memory. This is 41464 memory, which I had not worked on before, sporting a couple of extra pins compared to the 4116 and 4164 chips I normally test with my chip tester. I had a search around for a suitable tester for this type of chip, and found the eBay seller that sold me the other excellent tester also sells one suitable for these. So I bought one. Right, the 3 socketed chips all tested fine. Let's have a closer look at the problem area. These 2 pins here are bridged. This is the first problem. Some of these traces look a bit iffy, but we'll need testing to verify they are still intact. I suspect some of the wires under these joints are missing. They have the look of solder floating on top of the board. This one is just plain missing altogether. These corner pins are often connected to heavier traces like ground or VCC. This can make removing them very difficult. I suspect Simon attempted this with the too hot iron and a hand desoldering pump. Another worry is, are traces on the top side missing too? The black wire will have to be removed so I can get a proper look. A scrub with IPA and a toothbrush will make it a bit easier to see any problems. But taking all of those sockets out is going to be a priority. Knowing this is all lead-free solder, I give each pad a generous blob of leaded solder. You can see the different materials combine and the result is an unpleasant dull finish. Leaded and unleaded solder do not mix well, but the lead will lower the temperature required to remove the nasty stuff. That's the first socket out. On the top side, I'm encouraged. There are hardly any traces running under the chips here, so much less that will need to be fixed. I have no idea what this blue stuff is. This chip here is not in a socket. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's coming out anyway. I really like this method of desoldering pump and braid. I've had superb results with it so far. It does mean you need space around the sides of the chip to get the iron up against the legs, which isn't always possible on something like a ZX Spectrum. But on nice open boards like this, it works really well and the chips come free without a problem. Legs looking a bit worse for wear, but otherwise intact. Again, the top side looks decent. The last socket comes free once that pad, which we saw was missing, let go of its pin. I'm now having a poke around with my multimeter in continuity mode, looking for breaks and bridges, marking them on these handy diagrams of the traces I made. One for the backside and one for the front. Now, with the sockets and old solder out of the way, I can start to see where the damage is. There's quite a few pads missing here on the top, and these big blobs of solder on the decoupling caps will need to be dealt with. Next, some new sockets. Once I've soldered one in place, I go through it and check for bridges. Top side being a bit dodgy could encourage the solder to do unusual things. I don't want to introduce any more problems. With the sockets in place, I can now start to fix the broken traces with Bodge wires. This first one here is missing its pad altogether on this side. So the first thing I'll do is make a spring, apparently. This acts as a replacement pad and gives it something for the solder to flow onto, and just makes a better joint. Before I get into the testing, I decided to remove the floppy drive port. Damage here is quite extensive, and I worried there could be more possible bridges. Like this one here, for instance, and this one here. The unleaded solder is not playing nice, requiring multiple dilutions with leaded solder to get all of it out of the holes. back to the memory now, and it's bodge wire time. When dealing with things like this, with, to be brutally honest, extensive damage, it's quite easy to get snowblind when fixing problems. I really do try to be thorough and catch them all at the start, but it's not an ideal world, and I often miss things. Anyway, bodge wires were installed on the parts I found to be faulty. Time for a test. The 464 Plus won't run without a cartridge in the slot. This burning rubber cart also doubles up as its basic ROM. Before I can test, I need to replace these two black wires on the back of the board. Originally, they were on the top side, but were moved here by Simon when he did the 6128 upgrades. And this thing has broken free too. Probably not needed for the testing, but I'll put it back anyway. Well, that's a bit of a mess. In my expert opinion, please don't at me, I'm not really an expert, I think this is still broken. I've only got 2 of the memory chips in to give it a standard 64K. I wonder if adding the other chips will make a difference. Well, it's different, but it's still broken. Looking around the board, there are quite a few areas that are concerning, and it's difficult to know where to start. I do know I'll probably have to remove all of the work that Simon had done just to get it back to a baseline. Basically, start from scratch. I decided to start with this 40-pin chip here. This D765AC chip is a floppy disk controller and is one of the chips added to the machine to upgrade it to the 6128 spec. I knew working with all of this unleaded solder would probably cause blockages in my desolder station. To prevent that, I'm trying to remove the bulk of it with a hand pump first. I didn't even want to get any of this nasty stuff in my engineer pump, so it was back to Old Faithful I've had knocking about in the workshop forever, before I even knew how to solder. With most of that out of the way, it's now possible to see the damaged pads.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Calm down, Bollo. It's probably not that bad. Before I can desolder this, I need to replace the solder. Without it there, I won't be getting good heat transfer. Plus, the leaded solder will lower the required melting temperature. I bought a chip puller from China. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but I had high hopes. Yeah, terrible thing. Made from Coke cans, just not as sturdy. And barely fits over a 40-pin chip. It went straight in the bin.
What a waste of money that was.
And with the solder sucked away, most of the legs have come free. A little wiggling with the tweezers and they all let go. And And now to the other side, where we find...
Down there, right?
a bent over pin.
Oh,
On the Specky from
dear.
Hell series, I wondered how it was possible to do this and not realise. And at the time of filming this, not long after that series, I wondered the same. I must admit that since then I've come very, very close to making this exact mistake myself.
So that pad's okay. That one's burnt and gone. It doesn't look like it's got traces to it. Good, 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 good. Bridged. Good, good, good. Good, 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 good. Good, good, good.
Missed one.
Good, 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 good. Good, good, good. Scruffy but good, good. Gone. Good, good.
Not too bad on that side. 2 pads missing and a bridge. And the socket has pins that were pushed out during their last installation. This ended up being the worst of all the sockets fitted, but I had to be sure. So all the other ones would need to be removed and checked too. Next up is the SED chip. This is a data separator for the floppy controller. I won't pretend to know what that means. Oops, forgot to take the chip out. No harm done. Ah, there's a pin missing in the socket. Where could that be?
Oh, that's interesting.
No, it's not there. And it's not there. Ha! It's on the chip. Right, what's happened here? When Simon installed this, some of the holes weren't completely clear of solder. When the socket was installed, the pins were slightly pushed out. The top of the board here actually looks okay, with nothing missing at all. This is good. And the back side looks good too. No damage here. There are a few areas around the board that need some attention. This leg here is not connected to the wire it sits on. I'll come back to this later.
To there. But if I move the probe up onto the actual leg, that's not connected.
First, I'll remove these logic chips and the resistor pack next to them. This socket doesn't want to let go. I'm not forcing it. That would just lead to a lifted pad or trace. It's quite easy to see which one is not moving when you wiggle them. Right, what do we have on the top side? Well, that's a bridge. The pads look mostly okay here though. Before putting anything back, I decide to go around and tidy up some of the bad joints. Some have too much solder and some just don't look healthy. This one here looks like it might be missing a pad. Try to clean it up, but I'm not happy with the results, so I decide to remove the capacitor and see if it can be mounted another way. Capacitor might be okay, but there's some damage on the underside. Luckily, I happen to have a replacement cap in my stash. The wire has completely gone and the trace that runs through here is no longer connected. A suitable bodge is applied. But I still need to mount this capacitor, and that hole there is no longer connected to anything. This nearby one will make a good replacement. This bodge is now going to be close to the can of the capacitor, so some Kapton tape to insulate it will stop anything going bang. A bit more solder on the top just to make sure this is connected. Decent, happy with that. There's no damage to repair under the logic chips, so they can go back in. Same deal with the SED socket. The floppy controller chip location has a bit more damage, but luckily all of the damaged pads are not connected to anything, so it's safe to clean this up and put a socket in here too. I just spotted a possible problem. This stick trace here is lifted. I'll need to be aware of that when testing.
There's a break right here. So
Another round of checking continuity under the RAM area,
there,
and I've found this.
There goes to this one here, but not connected. It goes this way, connected to this one. But there's a break right there. Let's fix that.
I'm speaking more softly than usual here, as at the time I recorded this, it was high summer, and my workshop door is wide open. My neighbours already think I'm slightly cracked, and me talking to myself is only going to reinforce that view. I'm fairly sure this is all the brakes fixed. Fingers crossed it will work now. Oh, well, it seems to work.
Yes.
This is without the floppy drive controller chip installed, which is not needed.
Come on.
All 128k of RAM is installed, so running some diagnostics would be useful at this point.
Sight to behold.
Simon sent this kart emulator thing called an M4, which is a really neat way of loading ROM images and much more onto the plus range of Amstrads. It even has Wi-Fi capability. By default, this one is set up to run Noel from Noel's Retro Labs Amstrad Diagnostics.
What?
What indeed?
Why?
Wasn't what enough? Okay, I'm still not sure why the memory tested bad with this diagnostic. All I can say is the games that I loaded worked fine, and I think user error might have been playing a part in some way. For now, this works as a 128K 464 Plus. I gave the tape deck a clean and tested loading some games that way, and it worked a treat. I'll return to this machine in a future episode where I'll attempt to repair the floppy port and get a GoTech working. And I'll also show the second 464 Plus that Simon sent to be upgraded to the 6128 Plus spec in another episode. That second machine is safely back with Simon, and he's generously let me keep this one. In yet another future episode, we'll get to see yet another amazing donation Simon made. This beautiful Atari XEGS. I would say coming soon, but you know I'd be lying. I'll get round to it when I can. Before you go, I launched a second channel where I upload random updates, unboxing of amazing stuff I get sent, and just all the stuff I can't really put here without YouTube killing my channel off. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye!